Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. So if I have a coughing fit and you're disgusted and you turn off, don't despair. The program is podcast. If I survive the coughing fit, it will continue. 3cr.org.au. It's 1st of May, May Day. What does it all mean? Why is it important? Why has everybody forgotten about the 1st of May? I know there's a public holiday in Queensland, and I think West Australia and the Northern Territory. There's no public holiday in Victoria or New South Wales, if I got that correct. I know there's no public holiday in Victoria where I live. And the traditional, what happens here in Victoria is people march on the first Sunday after May Day, which will be the 5th. That's right, the 5th of May. But not to be outdone, we actually, us anarchists, we always celebrate May Day on the 1st of May, and we've been celebrating since 1886. Now, if you wonder what anarchy is all about, it's not just about celebrating May Day. Anarchos without rulers. It's about the anarchist struggle is a struggle to create a society without rulers. How do you create a society without rulers? Obviously, is important. Steps. There's no biblical kind of analogy, or nothing in the Quran, or the Torah, or the Hindu scriptures about it. Not even in. It's about creating a society without rulers. And how do you create a society without rulers? You devolve power, which means you share power, you break down hierarchy, and you share wealth. So simple concepts. You want to live in a society without rulers? You're involved in the struggle to improve people's lives. You're in the struggle to improve people's decision-making processes. Then whether you know it or not, you're an anarchist. And the good news is you won't grow horns or a tail. That's for capitalists. Now, let's move on. The 1st of May, 2019. So where it all began, well, I'd just like to start off right at the very beginning of dispossession and colonisation in the land of Australia. Now, the first reference in any of the historical records to people taking matters in their own hands and working collectively and together was when in 1791, 3 years after the colonisation process began, the convicts assembled in a tumultuous manner to demand rations to be issued weekly, not daily. You like that? The convicts assembled in a tumultuous manner. They began to understand that what direct action and solidarity was all about. If they worked together, they would be able to achieve some of their demands. In 1804, there's the Castle Hill Rebellion, which occurred in Sydney town, and 10 men were hung, including the leader William Johnson, for their troubles by the authorities in a rebellion which many people see as some type of Irish uprising. But the underlying issues were issues about access to food and the type of harsh working conditions that convicts worked under at that particular point in time. Now, you've got to remember that convicts were free labour. You didn't pay convicts. They worked for nothing. A little bit like work for the dole, you know? A little bit like work for the dole. We've got that, long-standing tradition. Now, the first strike that is in the literature, and it is very hard to find out this type of information because obviously the history of the country is written by the winners. And as we see it, the history of colonisation has been written by those who stole Indigenous people's lands. The history of the working class in this country has to a significant degree been written and rewritten. Those that exercise power and concentrate wealth in their hands, to sing their own praises. Now, unpaid convict labour was the type of labour that was used for over 4 decades in Australia to expand the British Empire. Unpaid convict labour. Now, convicts didn't migrate here. They were forced here. They were put on ships. Many died on the passages across. Many died when they arrived here. And they were put on ships for the most ridiculous crimes, like stealing a loaf of bread. And although there were hardened, ugly, nasty criminals amongst the convicts that were sent across, the great majority were basically people who were convicted of economic crimes, because at that particular point in time, as a result of the French Revolution across the Channel, the English royalty and the English ruling classes were shitting themselves in their pants. And every time, somebody tried to stand up for themselves, they attempted to squash it. So the first strike I can come across was one which was organised by James Strater, S-T-R-A-I-T-E-R. Strater, S-T-R-A-I-T-E-R, in 1822. Now, I'm sure you old folk out there know all about Hannibal MacArthur, the richest man in New South Wales, the biggest squatter, the biggest landowner, the biggest dispossessor of Indigenous Australians, the biggest employer, in inverted commas, of convict labour, whose wealth and reputation were linked to dispossession and the use of unpaid convict labour. In 1822, James Strater organised a strike on MacArthur's property in New South Wales at the height of the lambing season. And he was charged with inciting his master's servants to combine for the purpose of obliging him to raise their wages and increase their rations. So obviously the wages were for the ticket of leave men and women who were basically out on parole, and the rations were for the convicts who still, hadn't achieved their ticket of leave. So I'll read it out again, because there are some very important, these are the exact words of the charge. Inciting his master's servants. They weren't workers. We had a servant-master relationship, something that a lot of employers would like to see brought back in 2019, and something which the Liberal National Party governments have achieved to a significant degree in changing the balance of power between the employer and employee. So inciting his master's servants to combine, the word combine, working together, working in solidarity, just like the convicts in 1791 and 1804 worked collectively to improve their lot. Mr. Strater was charged with the heinous, horrible, evil crime of inciting his master's servants to combine for the purpose of obliging him to raise their wages and increase their rations. Although I understand the strike was partially successful, because if you strike at the height of the lambing system, he's got a real problem. And he does have to listen to his servants, Mr. MacArthur, and his overseers. So what did Mr. James Strater, get out of this? Did he get an Order of Australia? No, Australia didn't exist in those days. Was he freed as a convict? No. Was he paraded up and down the streets of Sydney as a hero? No. Was his name etched in the history books of this nation? No. Does anybody remember him? No. But for his activities in being involved in organising the first strike in Australia's history, he was sentenced to 500 lashes of the whip. 500 lashes of the whip. A sentence which would destroy any man and kill most. And after 500 lashes of the whip, your back and shoulders and arms would be a seething mass of bleeding, tortured, broken flesh and muscles with the bones exposed. Most convicts were given 50 lashes of the whips, or 100 lashes if it was a heinous crime. But Mr. Strater received 500 lashes. He was also sentenced to 1 month's solitary confinement on bread and water. So after the 500 lashes, and he was let off, tied, he was let off the poles he was tied to and collapsed to the ground. His body was picked up, bleeding, and he was chucked into this hole for a month. Could you imagine the filth and the rats and the possibility of infection, septicemia and death, on a ration of bread and water? And if he by some chance survived this punishment, which was a legally endorsed punishment, he was to spend the remainder of his sentence in a penal colony, like at Port Arthur in Tasmania. And what was his crime? Inciting his master's servants to combine for the purpose of obliging him to raise their wages and increase their rations. In the late 1820s, I think it was about 1826, 6 labourers from Dorchester, England, swore an oath, and they tried to form a union for agricultural workers. For their troubles, the Tolpuddle martyrs, as they were called, were sent to Australia as convicts. But the resistance to this sentence was so huge in England, the English ruling classes, concerned about peasant revolts, quashed the sentences 4 years later. And the Tolpuddle martyrs, many of which were sent to Port Arthur in Tasmania, because they were considered to be the most dangerous of the dangerous, because they had actually tried to form a union, were sent back to England. Now, as the number of migrants arriving in this country increased, there was increasing pressure on the colonial authorities to stop transportation of convicts to Australia. And it wasn't until the late 1840s, early 1850s, the transportation ceased. But during this period, workers that had skills began to combine together in short bursts of activity to improve their working conditions. And in 1824, we saw a Coopers strike in Sydney. And a Coopers strike, Coopers are people who are, put together barrels. Very important people in society in the early 19th century. And in 1829, Mr. Wentworth, another great man whose name is etched in history, a man who used convict labour, the typographical workers, those who set the little typographical plates on the Australian, went on strike to improve their situation. Now, trade societies began to be formed in Sydney, and the first trade society, which is the forerunner of trade unions, was the Sydney Shipwrights Trade Society. And this is people with skills came together and worked collectively to bargain for an improved rates, not just of pay, but improved working conditions and decreased hours. So many unions came and went during this period, because obviously it was almost as impossible as 2019. Because even during this period we had what was called the Masters Servants Act, or the Indentured Act, or the Apprenticeship Act. And apprentices were indentured to the employers, and if they ran away, irrespective of the reason they ran away, they were jailed. But things were moving. Things were changing. The Eureka Rebellion in Ballarat in 1854 highlighted to the colonial authorities that with the influx of people looking for gold across Australia, they couldn't use the old ways. They couldn't use the lash. They couldn't imprison people, for trying to work collectively together. That they needed to listen to working people. And in 1859, Charles Jardine Donne was the first manual worker, the first member of a trade association, who was elected to the Victorian Parliament in 1859 as the member for Collingwood. He was a stonemason. He worked during the day as a stonemason and sat in Parliament at night because there were no wages for parliamentarians at that particular point in time, and only the rich could afford to be parliamentarians. But the emerging trade union movement decided that it was time to move into the political arena. On the 1st of October 1855, the Sydney stonemasons, who'd combined together in a trade association, won the 8-hour day. Not the 40-hour week, but the 8-hour day and the 6-day week under the slogan, 8 hours work, 8 hours play, 8 hours rest. And on the 21st of April, 1856, Melbourne stonemasons left their job at the University of Melbourne and went across to all the major building sites in Melbourne, including Parliament House, which was being built in 1856, called all their members off the workplace and quickly won the 8-hour day because they worked collectively. There was no more threat from unpaid convict labour as the convict system of deportation to Australia had come to an end. So today that's the 1st of May 2019, I'll be at the 8-hour monument in Melbourne, at the corner of Russell and Lygon Street, with other activists, other anarchists, other radicals who celebrate May Day. And the 8-hour monument was erected in 1903 by the sculptor Percival Ball as a direct result of a public subscription to erect a monument to the 8-hour day by Melbourne Trades Hall Council, which was the first trades hall built in the world. That's right. Well, Ballarat was the second. But the people of Ballarat had it all on the people of Melbourne. They actually erected a monument, which you can still see, to the 8-hour struggle in 1858. Now, the trade union movement grew from strength to strength. And by 1891, the shearers' strike on the East Coast caused major shifts in the political ways this society, how this society was organised in 1891. Now, workers had been celebrating Labor Day, which is different to May Day, since 1871 in Sydney, when the stonemasons, the bricklayers, the carpenters and the builders' labourers joined together under the banner celebrating Labor Day, Union is strength, united to help. And if you go back through the archives and the records and you look at the marches to celebrate Labor Day, you will see thousands, if not tens of thousands of workers and their families and supporters taking the day off and holding marches through the city, reminding those that exercise power, reminding those that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, that they, and they alone, are responsible for the creation of wealth. Without labour, money is irrelevant. Totally, 100% irrelevant. So where does May Day fit into all this? Where does May Day fit into all this? And why do Australian anarchists, especially Melbourne Victorian anarchists, consider May Day, the 1st of May, to be their day? You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. The program is podcast. You can access it by going to 3cr.org.au. May Day, the facts. Not the fake news, but the facts. And although only a few dozen people will be celebrating May Day in Melbourne, maybe a few thousand in those states where May Day is a public holiday, it's important to understand the history of May Day and why it's so important to anarchists and other working people and radicals in this country. The history of May Day, both internationally and in Australia, is interlinked with the history of the anarchist movement, international anarchist and Australian movement. In 1884, at a conference of the Federated Trades and Labour Unions of the United States and Canada, which was held in the United States, the conference decided to launch an intensive campaign, their exact words, for an 8-hour working day that would culminate in widespread struggles on the 1st of May 1886. Now, although its skilled workers had gained the 8-hour day in Australia and many other parts of the world, semi-skilled and unskilled workers were still working 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And especially with the factories which were being built and the Industrial Revolution which was chugging along, labour was desperately needed. Cheap, docile labour was needed. And the last thing that employers wanted was a labour force that was unionised and combined and worked together. Heeding that call for the 1st of May 1886 to be a day of international struggle, demonstrations were held across the United States and Canada to mark the 1st of May 1886. In Chicago, over 30,000 workers went on strike and 80,000 took part in the demonstrations, a huge number for that time. And that was a struggle about the 8-hour day. In Melbourne, little old Australia, on the 1st of May 1886, David and William Andrade, heeding the call of the Federated Trades and Labour Unions of the United States and Canada, launched the Melbourne Anarchist Club, Australia's first anarchist organisation. So Australia's first anarchist organisation was launched on the exact day the first May Day was held. And let's not forget, the sun rises over Australia before the rest of the world, if you exclude New Zealand. That first May Day, that first act, was David and William Andrade forming the Melbourne Anarchist Club to herald in the 1st of May 1886. Now, back in Chicago, on the 3rd of May, 2 days after the general strike and mass demonstrations across the United States and Canada, workers protesting outside Mackay Harvesters in Chicago were shot. 4 were killed, dozens were wounded. And why were they killed and wounded? For having the audacity to combine together and agitate for an 8-hour day and improve working conditions. Chicago anarchists organised a protest meeting at the Haymarket Square for the next evening. The rally was non-violent. As the rally was breaking up, police, as they normally did, charged into the remaining few hundred demonstrators. Someone threw a bomb at the police lines, killing one police officer. The police panicked, firing indiscriminately into the crowd and at each other. 7 police and 4 demonstrators were killed, and over 100 police and demonstrators were wounded. 8 prominent Chicago anarchists were rounded up and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Not committing murder, conspiracy to commit murder. Although only 3 of the 8, Albert Parsons, August Spies, and Samuel Phelan, had actually spoken at the rally. The other 5 weren't even at the rally. All 8 that were charged with conspiracy to commit murder were found guilty. Albert Parsons, August Spies, Samuel Phelan, Michael Schwab, Oscar Neebe, George Engel, Adolf Fischer and Louis Sling. I think it's important that we remember their names. 7 were sentenced to death and one, Oscar Neebe, to 15 years in prison. August Spies, George Engel, Adolf Fischer, Albert Parsons were hanged on the 11th of November 1887. That day again, the 11th of November 1854, the formation of the Ballarat Reform League, the forerunner of the Eureka Rebellion. 11th of November 1880, the hanging of Ned Kelly at Melbourne Jail. 11th of November 1887, the hanging of 4 anarchists in Chicago. The 11th of November 1918, the end of the war to end all wars, which was fought by workers at either end of the bayonet for the glory of God, King and country, not democracy or freedom or equality. 11th of November 1975, the dismissal of the Whitlam Labor government. I wonder when the next 11th of November auspicious date will occur. Now, Lewis Sling committed suicide in his cell the night before he was to be hung. And Samuel Fielden and Michael Schwab were both sentenced to life in prison. Now, surprise, surprise, a number of years later, all 8 men were found to be victims of widespread hysteria, whipped up by the Chicago Yellow Press, the Hearst Press, that's right, the Yellow Press, forerunners of the Murdoch Press. And it was later proven that all 8 men had nothing to do with the bombing, and those executed and those imprisoned received a full pardon. A full pardon. The Melbourne Anarchist Club held May Day meetings and lectures in 1887 and 1888. 3 years later, on the 14th of July 1889, John Norton from Sydney attended the Second Internationale in Paris, who decided, and these were all the labour organisations across the world, to make the 1st of May a great day of international demonstration for workers' rights. So that very meeting where that decision was made by the Second Internationale to make the 1st of May a day of international demonstrations on behalf of working people, John Norton from Sydney represented the Australian trade union movement, although Australia wasn't a country at that stage. May Day was celebrated in Victoria at the offices of Dr. William Maloney, who was the Radical Labor member for the seat of Melbourne for over 45 years, at his offices in 1890 and 1891. And in 1892, I've got ahead of myself. The first May Day march that occurred in Australia occurred as a result of the shearers' strike. And over 1,000 men, women and children, 600 on horseback, celebrated May Day, the 1st of May, in Barcaldine and Ipswich in Queensland at the height of the shearers' strike in 1891. Eureka flags were flown at this first May Day celebration, and there are quite interesting accounts, eyewitness accounts. The procession was led by 4 strike leaders wearing blue sashes. Remember, the blue was not the colour of royalty in those days, it was the colour of struggle. The blue from the Eureka flag. In 1893, moves were made in Queensland to have the 8-hour day celebrated on the 1st of May instead of March. And that occurred. In Melbourne, well-known Melbourne anarchist Chummy Fleming, which Chummy Lane in Carlton is named after, held The first May Day meeting and march from the Burke and Wills Monument in Melbourne to the Yarra Bank in Melbourne on the 1st of May 1892. The march was led by two men carrying huge red flags. In 1893, Chummy Fleming, putting his anarchist principles into action, called a meeting of radical activists in Melbourne, from across Melbourne, to organise future May Day celebration. Now, Chummy Fleming was a bit of a character and a bit of a wild card. He was the only man I know who's been jailed for in Australia for being involved in a library dispute. That's right. The working people of Melbourne felt it wasn't good, especially when they were working 6 days a week, that they didn't have access to the Melbourne State Library on Sunday. And Chummy Fleming refused to pay his fine for being involved in demonstrations, and he was sentenced to a month's imprisonment for actually being involved in that. But they won that struggle. Now, at the end of the 19th century, marvellous Melbourne had become a place of squalor. Not only was there a great deal of homelessness and despair and unemployment, there was even starvation in the streets. Chummy Fleming, near Princes Bridge, jumped onto the running board of the Victorian Governor, Lord Hopetoun, and told him about the plight of the unemployed and the poor and the homeless in Melbourne. The Governor listened and said, "How can I help?" And Chummy Fleming asked him to provide food for the unemployed. And he said, "I can't do that, but I've got six cases of French champagne in my cellar. I'm happy to donate that to the unemployed." And there are pictures in the mid-1890s of Chummy Fleming donating 60 bottles of champagne in his boot shop in Lygon Street to about 6,000 people. Talk about the loaves and fishes. I wonder if he had the same help from the Lord that Jesus Christ did, but that's a different story, which has got little to do with May Day. Now, Chummy Fleming died in 1950. He took part in every May Day demonstration, although during the 1920s he wasn't very welcome, because the May Day march was basically dominated by Stalinists at that particular point in time. But he always participated, starting long before the march started, but walking very slowly so the march caught up with him. And when he died, his only wish was that his ashes be scattered on the Yarra Bank on May Day. Now, the following year, as May Day approached, nobody could find his ashes. So the Butchers' Union was asked to, bring some ashes. And this lad arrived, this huge tin. I mean, those of you who've had family cremated or friends cremated will know it's not that. You don't get this huge tin. So it was a very windy day in 1951. And as the ashes were thrown into the wind, what were purported to be Chummy Fleming's ashes were spread among the crowd of people who were coughing, like I just did, and spluttering, as his ashes, or some poor animal's ashes, went up their noses and ears and mouths and eyes. So Chummy Place in Carlton still bears his name, and if you want to learn more about him, the State Library of Victoria is a great place to go. So why do we bother? Why do we bother? Why do we bother 133 years later to celebrate May Day on the 1st of May? Why am I bothering to waste my afternoon by going to the 8-hour monument at midday with a few dozen radical activists and anarchists to celebrate that day? Why do we walk to Her Majesty's Theatre at 219 Exhibition Street? Because Her Majesty's Theatre held the office of the Melbourne Anarchist Club, When the Melbourne Anarchist Club was formed in the 1st of May 1886, they needed officers. And they were able to get a room in the Her Majesty's Theatre on the 3rd floor. Although the current Her Majesty's Theatre is not the original Her Majesty's Theatre, as that burnt down in a fire. So today we will be congregating on the 1st of May in Melbourne at the 8-hour monument at the corner of Russell and Victoria Street. At 12:30 we'll walk across to Her Majesty's Theatre to pay our respects to the members of the Melbourne Anarchist Club. And then we'll be crossing the road. There must be at least 22 metres journey to the Paramount Food Hall, basically a food hall for a quiet lunch, May Day lunch. And if you are still in the mood for celebration, tonight at 6 p.m, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. is our May Day dinner at La Porchetta's at 395 Lygon Street, Carlton North. So you're welcome to all of those events, but there's no catering. You pay for your own food and drinks, but you can just come along and have a cup of coffee. You don't have to eat. So mark the 133rd anniversary of the Australian anarchist movement. Mark the 133rd anniversary of the May Day in this country and around the world. So why? Well, May Day, and to a lesser extent Labor Day, because it's been legislated out of existence, but May Day honours the sacrifices of all those men, women and children involved in the struggles that occurred around industrialisation, when the peasants were forced off their common land to be used as factory fodder for the new emerging industrial capitalist class. And every little thing, from the right to vote in an election, from the fact that some people still receive overtime payment, although it has been removed, from the fact that people can still join trade unions, although it's becoming more and more difficult as time goes on, because of laws which basically criminalise legitimate trade union activity in this country. Whereas a trade unionist, you have less rights in many quarters than somebody who's imported $1 billion worth of crystal meth. That's right, legally. So every little thing you think about, healthcare, public education, public infrastructure, public roads, public entertainment, the fact that we do have a taxation system where the rich are sometimes taxed, although it doesn't seem to apply to Facebook and Google. The fact is that all those little perks, all those little things that you have at work are the result of the struggles, the blood, sweat and tears of men, women and children over decades who have won those rights for us. And today, in 2019, we have forgotten. Anzac Day is about lest we forget. May Day is about we have forgotten. We have forgotten that everything we take for granted, even the fact that, that public housing, everybody's business crowd was on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House this morning at 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. to highlight that issue. We have forgotten that right would not have existed without the efforts of tens of thousands, if not millions, of Australian men, women and children involved in industrial, workplace, community struggles. And we've seen the trade union movement join community struggles during the Green Ban days with the Builders Labourers Federation. And we have seen that it's those industries that are unionised, that work collectively, that have the best outcome as far as working people is concerned. And those people who are forced to bargain individually or who are browbeaten into not joining a union or not employed because they're union members find that all those rights and liberties and financial bonuses and public assets which you can access have all disappeared with the increase in casualisation, with the refusal of people to pay award rates, with the importation of cheap labour for the very purpose of stopping the trade union movement from working in particular areas. And the list goes on and on. So on May Day, we honour those men, women and children, many of whom died, many of whom were pilloried, many of whom were ostracised, were blacklisted, were never able to work in their chosen field because they had the audacity to stand up for the people around them. So on May Day, we remember them. And I encourage you to join me and many other activists and radicals and anarchists this Wednesday, the 1st of May, at the 8-hour monument at midday. And if you can't make it this year, there's always next year and the year after and the year after. As long as 1 or 2 or 3 of us remember that day, May Day will continue to live. But more importantly, it's the spirit of May Day that will continue to live. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Now, I'll just move on to a few other little issues before we disappear. Now, I don't know if people have, noticed what's been happening in Sudan. I try to keep up to date because we are seeing one of the few social revolutions that we have seen in the history of humanity. This is not just an economic revolution. It's not just a revolution about overthrowing a dictator. It's not just a revolution for bread. It's a revolution for a change of life, a change of way people interact. And 2 days ago, the Sudanese Islamic Brotherhood, which was instrumental in introducing Sharia law after the 1989 coup, which saw al-Bashir in power, we have seen that conference closed down by demonstrations who want to see the end of Sharia law in Sudan. As I speak, it looks like there's been a failed coup in Venezuela, with the opposition, aided and abetted by the United States government, has been pushing and shoving to overthrow the Venezuelan government. And we saw an attempted coup today. And this struggle is not finished. Now, if you are interested in following this up, there is a gathering down at the Maritime Union of Australia at 46 to 54 Island Street in West Melbourne at 4 p.m. Entertainers. It's a $20 entry fee, to assist the Venezuelan people overcome this particular hurdle they are now facing. Because if you read the mass media, you would think that the current government are mass murderers. Sometimes you've got to read between the lines. But getting back, so keep your eye on the Sudanese Revolution and what's happening in Venezuela, because they are indicators of what people can do when they work together. The thing about the Sudanese Revolution, the social revolution, is it has no friends. The United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Britain, France, Iran, all terrified. They're terrified because they're seeing people power in action. If it wasn't for the junior army officers and rank-and-file soldiers in the Sudanese army, this would have finished long ago in a bloodbath. But people are holding their nerve, and we offer them our support. Now, public housing. We're going to hold a 24-hour demonstration on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House to mark the winter solstice, the 21st of June. From midnight to midnight. It's a Friday. So put it in your calendar, take the day off of work if you're working, if you're not. Midnight to midnight. The shortest day of the year, possibly the coldest day of the year, to highlight the growing problem of homelessness and couch surfing and inability to acquire access to reasonable accommodation in Australia, across Australia. If you go to the hashtag steps to a home. Why steps to a home? Parliamentary steps, change of legislation, use sales tax revenue, use stamp duty revenue from the sale of homes for public housing, house 15% of Victorians in public housing within a decade. Simple slogan, simple solution to what is becoming an intractable, complex problem. So if you're into this, the game of hashtag steps to a home, and that's the steps to a home. Parliament House steps to a home. Changing legislation, as I keep saying over the last 2 years, it doesn't need a revolution. It doesn't need a social revolution. It just needs a majority of votes in both houses of Parliament to make public housing a central issue in this country, not just the state of Victoria. And talking about unacceptable governments, you've got to hand it to the people of Saudi Arabia. President Groper, Trump's major ally in the Middle East, major ally after Israel in the Middle East, just executed, as I said before, 36 people, public beheadings, mostly Shia Muslims, and one poor human being who'd been beheaded, his body was publicly crucified to act as an example. These people are worse than the Islamic State. They are responsible for some of the worst atrocities in the history of the planet, in the history of the 21st century. They are behind many of the terrorist outrages which occur around the country, and they continued to be supported by the United States government. Well, the thing about human rights is, I hate to tell you, they're universal. They are universal. As the Sudanese people struggle against the yoke of Sharia law, wanting to overthrow that yoke, we begin to understand that human rights are universal. They are universal and they apply to everybody, irrespective of cultural norms, irrespective of language groups, irrespective of religious belief, irrespective of sexual orientation, irrespective of race, irrespective. They are universal. Universal. And many people have forgotten. As we kowtow, to all these horrible cultural practices, like genital mutilation, that human rights are universal and they transcend religion, they transcend culture, they transcend sexual orientation. They are universal. And I am proud to be part of that struggle for universal human rights. You'll be listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. We've had a special May Day program. Hopefully, if you can't join us this year, you'll join us next year. The 1st of May will be there next year. So join us on the 1st of May. Celebrate it on the day it falls on. You can celebrate on the Sunday after or, the next Christmas, but celebrate on the day it falls on. And we celebrate it to pay our respect and honour all those men, women and children involved in those numerous struggles over numerous decades to give us what we enjoy today. It wasn't given to us on a platter because we begged and beseeched. It was given to us because we combined together. We worked collectively to ensure that our needs and the needs of our children and grandchildren are put before the needs to create profits for a small group of people. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. That hashtag for the Winter Solstice campaign, Steps to a Home. Steps to a Home. You can go to my personal Facebook page, Toscano for the Public. Anarchist Media Institute webpage, anarchistmedia.org. You can join public interest before corporate interest. That's right, for the many, not the few, although I've noticed the Greens have stolen our slogan for this election, so good luck to them. You go to pibci.net, pibci.net. Yes, I occasionally answer phone calls. Leave a message on 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. Yes, we still need $1 stamps. We're on the verge of sending out our big Pipsy mail out. It's going to cost us about $1,200. We've got about $800 in stamps. We need about another $400. We're nearly there. we're ready to go. And don't forget, regular listeners of the Anarchist World This Week in Melbourne, the 3CR Radiothon is on the 12th of June. That's right. Just round the corner, collect your pennies, do what the rich and powerful do, claim a legitimate legal tax deduction for listening to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station. Thank you once again to the Community Radio Network for broadcasting the Anarchist World This Week across Australia. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.